Hello, I'm Michael Mayer, and here we are with episode 3 of my VocalWisdom.com Masterclass podcast. All right, I was going through the material of questions that I've had stored up over the years, and I just see that there's so much to cover that I'm deciding to go for a while at least to try see what it's like to do 2 classes a week. And so here's the second one for this week. And the topic for today is based on the questions from 2 different individuals that have a similar focus. So we're going to kind of put them together. And the main concern is fatigue, vocal fatigue. And one is a voiceover artist, so he does speaking, and what he came to me with was, I'm going to read it here. He works as a voiceover performer in a vocal booth, and he struggles with vocal fatigue. He finds it a real struggle to sustain his voice for anything longer than 15 or 20 minutes. So, voiceover artists, they sometimes have jobs where they do where they read books for like audiobooks, and I've heard for those you read it all day long. Your voice, you're using your voice for 8 hours. So now the people I've heard discuss this are authors, and they don't have any voice training, so they do that 8 hours of reading, and they talk about how their voice, they can't talk anymore. Their voice is completely shot. And this is just talking, right? And it seems odd to think that you can completely lose your voice from just talking, and they'll be silent for a couple days later. I just read this recently from an author that was talking about recording his audiobook. So it's a very normal, unfortunately normal, but very common thing. And so he's asking about that, what he can do, how he can have his voice keep working for, as long as he needs it for the different kinds of jobs that he has available. He mentions that he's worked hard at reducing tongue tension and making sure that the tongue is not moving backwards or pulling back and putting pressure on the voice or blocking it. So those are good things. He mentions speaking from the diaphragm, which I'll cover as we discuss this, whether, a lot of these things have to do with how you interpret these terms, right? I've always talked about that. We have to define what we mean by these things. Relaxing. I'm going to talk about relaxing and what, obviously relaxing seems like it would be a good thing. But again, we need to understand the context, because sometimes relaxing is not going to help. So that's his situation. And then the other is a singer-songwriter, plays guitar, sings, kind of a easy pop rock, not sort of folk, but not really folk, but kind of a folk pop rock sort of combination, I guess, would be. I don't want to misdefine, make a mistake defining his music, but that's kind of the feel of it. It's not real hard. It's not hard rock. It's not really vocally demanding. It's pretty, it's pretty calm, and that's what I mean by sort of having a little bit of a folk feel to it. But it's good singing, so is what it would really benefit his situation. And he's asked me to, previous to this, he asked me to review a video of a vocal exam with a doctor in a voice clinic. And so I've done that a week or 2 ago, and we've been having a discussion. And so I want to include his situation here in this class, because it kind of fits nicely together with the voiceover artist's issue, because they're both dealing with fatigue. And that kind of gives us a good place to start. We're talking about dealing with vocal fatigue. Vocal fatigue generally, now in my experience, vocal fatigue generally shows up more in speaking than in singing, but it all depends on how you're using your voice. So for the singer in this pair, vocal fatigue is showing up in his singing because of the condition of his voice and what that does to the way it phonates. So, and then for the voiceover artist, it's mainly a lack of training, a lack of understanding of the voice as a musical instrument, as a sound, even more simply as a sound producing instrument. And it's probably fitting that I have a little bit of vocal fatigue myself because I was just practicing right before I recorded this. So, vocal fatigue is sometimes it's just a product of using your voice vigorously, and my voice will be fine in an hour. Sometimes vocal fatigue is, more often vocal fatigue is a product of misuse or lack of balance. So that's the starting point. Fatigue is a product of some sort of imbalance, lack of balance in the way the voice is operating. And that balance, right, when we talk about balance, we're always talking about a pair of things, two things, right, balance each other. And in our case, we're talking about forces. And the forces are the force of, now we use the word force, but obviously it shouldn't be forceful. It's just they are forces that are working together. And the one force is the force of the air pressure from the breathing. And the other force is the resistance, the force of resistance provided by the vocal cords. And so it's like how a trumpet player uses their lips. It's like how the strings operate on a violin, or any kind of string for that matter, but say a violin, because you kind of drag the bow along the string, and the bow dragging is a friction, so that's like the force of our breath. And then the tautness of the string is a force of resistance. And the skill of the string player is to learn how to use that bowing to elicit a nice, clean, regular vibration of the string. And if you ever walk by say a Suzuki class, like I used to in college when they would have Suzuki classes in the evening after college classes were done, I'd walk by that room and you hear all this screeching, and those are the sounds of string players that don't really know don't have the skill yet of really working the bow. So that's the balance we're looking for, is a productive relationship between the vocal cords that provide an elastic resistance to the air pressure from our breathing. Now, the aspect of the breathing, the air pressure from the breathing, is a pretty widely recognized component of vocalization. So I think we can see lots of emphasis on the breath. We hear people talking about the breath. Our voiceover artist even recognized that common theme when he mentioned that he was trying to speak from the diaphragm. And this is one of the terms that relate to that the breathing is providing energy to the voice. And this is a good thing, but it also can be a problem, because if we're only emphasizing the breath, then we can fall into the trap. We have the risk of falling into the trap of overworking the breath. And when we do that, if we're singing, or even when we're talking right now, the breath right there is going through the voice, and it's not really efficient. Efficiency is a related element to balance. So if the breath is going through the voice, then there's a lack of balance. It's out of balance. And it's not efficient. And when that happens, that's one of the common reasons for fatigue. We usually assume that, having the breath be nice and free and having a lack of tension and having this real smooth sort of vocalization, we tend to assume and believe that would be so gentle that we would not risk fatigue. But we'd be wrong. There's a lot of speakers and a lot of singers that experience vocal fatigue because they're being too gentle and there's not enough voice resistance to the breath, and so it atrophies. All that breath is going through the voice, and that's going to become, if you do that for too long, that's going to become not only tired, the muscles around the voice will probably start to constrict. That's the tension that we tend to notice, and that tension, we try to eliminate that tension by relaxing. But the problem is that basically relaxing was the original reason that the tension started to happen. Something that I always want to point out to people and make sure people recognize is that tension, we have to figure this out, but tension in some way or another is the body's way of compensating for something that's lacking, right? So if we start to feel tense, we usually assume that the tension is the problem. But the problem didn't originate with the tension. The problem originated with some kind of lack preceding the tension. And the tension is the body's way of compensating for that. So in the case of the voice, if we feel tension around the larynx, in the throat, in the tongue, in the jaw, these are not just appearing randomly. They're appearing in response to the way that we're using the voice. And so just trying to eliminate the tension is not a bad thing, but it's I guess what I would say is it's an incomplete remedy, because all you're doing is taking away the compensation. You still haven't remedied the reason the tension showed up, and that is this relationship between the vibration of the vibration material, the vocal cords of the voice inside the larynx here, and that relationship with the breath. So the first thing we have to do is understand what these elements are, right? In our body. We have to understand them in our experience. And that's where just writing this out has a limited benefit, because you can't see or hear it in action. And so it's harder to grasp. And I know that, and that's why I'm kind of transferring the way I do things to more towards video and less towards writing. I've done plenty of writing over the years. So now I want to actually give examples of these things. And so what is the breath? Well, I think the breath is pretty self-explanatory. We all experience our breath. Sometimes we don't use our breath well enough, and then then the throat will compensate by being tighter, because a smaller aperture, right? Just think about this in kind of a physics, basic scientific way, right? A smaller aperture requires less air to make it go. So in general, we do want what I call a small glottis. But the problem is that for someone who hasn't developed a good coordination with their equipment, they're going to make a smaller aperture by squeezing the throat. ah, and then the breath doesn't really have to do much of anything, almost nothing noticeable, because the aperture is squeezed so small. That's not what we want. That's not the way we want to accomplish a small voice. But it is a way that a lot of pop singers deal with a lack of coordination. Because otherwise they would be ah, and so then to have power, they squeeze the throat, because that maximizes the amount of air pressure they have. And again, that's not the way we want to do things. The other side of that possibility is to be pretty free around here, but have, like, basically what I talked about before, have basically all breath. And we have kind of singers who do this too. So we have singers that squeeze, and we have singers that blow, And generally the people who blow air and don't squeeze are considered a better option, because they're not squeezing. Because when we squeeze, we sound tense. When we blow air, we sound more relaxed. But the problem is that there's a lack of balance, like I keep saying. So how do we find balance? We have to understand how to differentiate between squeezing the throat and allowing the true vocal cords to participate in the vocal act. All right, so how do we do that? Well, one is just by conceptualizing it. Conceptualization is huge. It's really the way we have influence over the voice, over the body in general. Okay, so we need to conceptualize that inside here, and we can do like a light, I do light coughing, and notice how light that was? It's almost like a whispered cough. The only thing to make sure when you interpret what I mean by a whispered cough, it's not, or a laugh, a whispered laugh. It's not a big H. It's not an aspirate. It's actually this little tapping action. You know, let's see if you can hear. Okay, so it's just this little popping, very, very like you're doing with the vocal cords. So they actually are touching and making contact and popping, and it's not a forceful thing. What that does is just gives you some sensation of the valve action that is natural to the larynx, and then we use the breath suspension that I explained in my article, The Number One Mistake Singers Are Making, where we breathe and we stop. And when we stop, the glottal space, glottis is the opening between the vocal cords. So when we stop breathing, the glottal space closes, and just automatically. It doesn't. You don't feel it. You don't feel like that. That's like a double valve closing. And then there's air pressure too. We don't do that. That doesn't really. That's like that's for like if a car fell on you and you have to lift it off of you to save your life. That's purely a life-saving mechanism. It's not. It doesn't do us any good for singing. Sometimes singers fall into the trap of using it, but we don't want to do that. So we want to stay. If you notice, if you try that, you'll feel that all of the muscles in the breathing down here they're clamping down, and what they're doing is they're bracing the torso and producing pressure inside the torso, especially in the abdominal cavity, which really stabilizes the spine so that the torso becomes very rigid, and we're able to apply a lot of power through the torso when we do that. That's why weightlifters will do that sometimes in order to create more stability in the torso so they can lift more weight. Like I said, lifting a big rock or a car or something, we'll do that to be able to put more power through our legs or through whatever. So but see, that clamps this really close, and then the vocal cords aren't flexible enough to vibrate. And so then that's not good for singing. So what we want to do is just have this light sort of contact, And like I said, it happens pretty naturally, pretty automatically if we stop breathing. And so the big mistake that we make is that we inhale and immediately exhale to vocalize. Ha, ha, and the glottis never has a chance to close and become a clean, effective vibrating mechanism, right? So what we need to do is we need to breathe and stop. Ah, 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 just like I talk about in everything I've done so far. Talk about breathing, stopping, then speaking. And the reason we can combine the question from the speaker and the question from the singer is because singing should be essentially the same gesture as good speaking, but just extended, just continued for duration, and also maybe a little bit more enthusiastic, because singing is more expressive than speaking. That's kind of the idea, is that singing comes out of speaking, because as a performer you need to think of it as if the person that's doing the singing just can't express those feelings through speaking, so they continue through into singing, right? So that we have ah, 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 and then it's just ah, and it just carries on. Now, where does the breath come into this? The breath is underneath the voice, right? So the role of the breath is to feed that vibration of the vocal cords and keep it going. Now, when it's not, when the breath isn't blowing through the voice, then it's more, like I said, it's more efficient. Then we don't feel like we're running out of breath. A lot of times people complain about feeling like they're running out of breath before they get to the end of the phrase. Well, that's just an obvious sign that we're wasting the breath. Ah, right? So that the respiratory system is collapsing. We should never collapse. It should feel like ah, ah. Now, see, that's low for me, but it's still vibrating. It's still fine. So, the way we do this again is we breathe and we stop, and we feel comfortable, but we notice that we feel like our respiratory system is inflated. It feels like it's inhaled, and we try to stay in that inhale position. And I talked about this in a previous video, where if this goes down, then we're going to release the breath loose. If this stays up and the abdomen, the abdomen just gives the breath direction so that it's always going towards the voice, rather than The only thing I'm consciously doing is, with the one that's breathy, is I'm letting the rib cage collapse so it exhales the breath. And the one that's a more pure phonation, I'm keeping the rib cage suspended, and I'm just in kind of directing the abdomen to go this way, and it's not really moving very far. It's not it's just it's just kind of gently massaging. It's like flexing, but it's not like, it's just massaging itself in that direction. So we want to always keep the breath under the voice. That's what it means for the voice to be on the breath, is that the breath is under the voice and not going through it. The breath should never be above the voice meaning the larynx. If the breath gets up here, then the larynx has to open up in order to allow that to happen, and then it's not going to vibrate well. And it's this lack of clean vibration that causes fatigue. Because sometimes we might, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we might be constricted and tense, and we might think that's the reason we're fatiguing. That will contribute to it. But the reason that that constriction is happening is because the glottis is relaxed open and we're exhaling. And so the body is responding, is reacting to that by constricting in order to try to keep the breath under control. Ha, ha. The closure isn't in the true vocal cords, ah, where then the rest of the airway is open and relaxed. Ah, it's in the vocal cords are open and then something else is constricting. So that's the reason constriction happens, and we feel that as tension. Maybe tension in the tongue, but certainly tension in around the throat. So the key also with that is when we are tense, I think I've talked about this before recently, the muscles are shortening. So if we're stretching ourselves out, what does stretching ourselves out mean? It means feeling long, feeling open, and not feeling longer rather than shorter. And that means in every kind of dimension, right? So it could be width, that's like the rib cage feeling open, that's stretched rather than collapsed. The neck, that's stretched rather than collapsed. The torso, stretched, collapsed. The throat, the throat and the jaw go together. Jaw, stretched. Stretched, collapsed. You can hear that sounds a little more tense because that's closing up. So all of these things kind of go together. So a general feeling of being stretched out, like that, rather than just slack. See, now there, when I'm relaxed like that and slack, you can hear, hopefully, how now the breath is just going through the voice. If I were to talk like that for 5 or even 5 minutes, definitely 10 minutes, that would be fatigued. All right, and that's what in teaching. That's a really challenging thing because you do a lot of talking when you teach. So we have to watch out for that. I've worked with school teachers, classroom teachers also that are talking all day long with no voice training. Their voices break down. A lot of times when the voice fatigues, it breaks down, and then you do that day after day after day. In 6 months, you've got some kind of vocal injury, like nodules or something of that sort. I just had a consultation with somebody who is a life coach, and she gives presentations on a regular basis. And her voice, when she started giving presentations regularly, her voice started to break down, and she actually developed polyps and had surgery for that. And so these are things you don't want to have happen. And the only way to avoid them is to understand how to use your voice. Okay? So the little cough, I like to feel like I'm doing that in a laughing sort of way, so it's very, very reflexive. Okay? Reflexes, natural behavior, these are the types of things we're going for. Now, we don't start the voice with this action because that's too wild. We'll get that. It shouldn't be like a shock. It should just be stillness. That's where the suspension comes in. Stillness. And then and like if I'm speaking, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's like I said, my voice is a little tired right now, but I can still speak for whatever, half hour, doing this video for you. And it's not like I feel the same now at the end that I did at the beginning. No increase. I don't feel any tightness. My tone quality might not be perfect, but it's still perfectly fine. And like I said, once I get a chance to rest for an hour, it will be back to normal, and it will actually be stronger because I exercised it. So the voice is just like the rest of the body. It strengthens through exercise. You place a demand on it, you work with it. But the difference is that you're dealing with a smaller dimension, a smaller scale. So you don't exert yourself the same that you might when you're exercising your legs or your, the larger muscles of your body. These are very small muscles, so they don't. You want to make sure that you're exerting them in proportion to what they are. So when we're talking about the larynx, and we're talking about I don't even feel that those muscles are so small. It's more of a concept where I think not blow the air through. I just think say the word, say what you're going to say it with the voice. So you it's a sensation, but it's not a feeling of any kind of real drastic drastic actions. It's just very subtle, and you think, okay, say I'm going to count to 5. So I think in my concept, the way I conceptualize the way the body's going to do that, I don't say it with my mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that neglects the larynx. So now I don't have a good vibrating source, right? Musical instruments are played at their vibration. Clarinets, oboes are played at the reed, which are their vibration. Trumpets are played at their lips, which is the vibration. Violins are played at the string, which is their vibration. Okay, so we want to do the same thing. And the same way, we want to be gentle. We don't want to be forceful or rough. If what I just did when I spoke at my mouth is the breath goes to where you think. So the breath went all the way to my mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is now responding reflexively to my intention to speak clearly. E, O, U. And now do all kinds of distortions. I didn't do anything more with my breath. 1, 2, 3. Now that sounds awkward and unnatural. So, and especially for it's true for any kind of voice use, but especially for speaking, doing things deliberately with the breath is very unnatural. Will come across as unnatural. So that doesn't really work. But also that's true for singers. A lot of classical singers will do that, deliberate things with the breath. And it's just a form of forcing the voice. But if we do then even a more strong expression is going to come from the voice, and not from the breath. That's just forcing. So that relationship everything traces back to that relationship and how those forces are working together. And again, when I say forces, I mean like this. I don't mean it's just it's like, the traditional saying, the voice on the breath. It's just like the larynx is just laying on your breath like a leaf on water. It's just very buoyant, very delicate. There's nothing pushing down on it. One of the traps that sometimes people fall into is putting weight down on the voice. And you can hear that just distorts. It's distorting the voice. So that has nothing to do with what we want. We are using the true vocal tissue, the vocal cords, the vocal folds. We're not using larger muscles going down onto the vocal folds. It's just and and the same thing applies if you're in the female range, the female register. Ooh, and sometimes one of the observations from the singing individual of this pair that are inspiring this rant is talked about how when he's exercising his lighter voice, if he goes from ooh, if he's on ooh, it seems to be okay. Ooh. But if he goes to ah, it turns to all the breath. And what that is a sign of is that the vocal muscles, the muscles that control the way the vocal cords come together and adjust for pitch and just for simply to vibrate, it's a sign that those muscles are not coordinated yet. They need to be trained to do ah, 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 and speak in that adjustment. Ah, 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 so that they can speak in that similar sort of weightlessness in the normal voice like I'm doing here. Ah, 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 and not heavy and thick, okay? Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. I kind of gone on a little bit with this class because this is really a, not only is this a fundamental aspect to what we're doing, and it's a fundamental aspect, but it's a not very well understood aspect, and so I kind of want to try to be thorough on just that specific thing, and try not to get too diluted and wandering off, because this is a really, really critical thing, not only because we need to do it well for the voice to really be balanced, which allows us to avoid fatigue and feel some sense of comfort and ease in our singing and speaking, but also because it's such a easily misapplied concept. It's such an easily distorted thing to do, where when we talk about the vocal cords, it's so easy to become abusive rather than just letting them function. Just let them function naturally and freely. Don't baby them. And it's a delicate balance. Don't baby them so that you're breathy, and should be really gentle like that, so then you're not really using the voice. But also don't be harsh, and forceful, so that you're stiffening them, and you can hear how it's distorting the voice and making it harder than it should be. So we want to just we want to just speak, and that's where I want to end. Is speaking should always still be included in our singing. One of the problems that I think we have as singers is that we start singing and our singing doesn't include any speaking in it. We should always feel like we should feel like we should feel like we're still speaking while we sing. And that might be something that would be more of a long-term concept to work on, but it's really helpful because our brain connects to our larynx through the nervous system, and the nervous system, the whole role of the nervous system is to fulfill our intentions, right? So when the idea of speaking while we sing serves that aspect. It serves the intention of saying something. Where when we sing, oftentimes what happens is we don't know that, or we forget that, and we just make sounds. And now we're not really saying anything. And so then the larynx doesn't get stimulated. The larynx gets stimulated by the brain through the nervous system to fulfill the intention to say something, whether that's speaking something like I'm saying right now, or it's singing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See all those words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I'm just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there I'm using my breath and my voice is basically turned off. So if we think of pronouncing, speaking while we sing, then we will be stimulating, the brain will be stimulating the nervous system, which will stimulate the larynx so that it will be more functionally complete. and it doesn't require deliberate 1, 2, 3. It doesn't require any deliberate tensing or anything, you know, trying. I started telling people, you know, if you're trying, then you're trying too hard. Automatically. There shouldn't be any trying. You just sit there and you say it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's how the same vocal practice, the same vocal coordination can be applied to classical singing, or any other style, musical theater, folk singing, pop singing, rock singing, because it's just natural behavior of saying something, expressing things with words and music. That's it. And then the context takes care of the details, whether it's or it's You know, the context of the music will determine the fine tuning, but the basic functioning is the same. It's a natural expression of words and melody that comes from your musical imagination in your brain, transfers through the nervous system, stimulates the larynx, stimulates your breathing, and you have this real natural behavior. Okay? So that's good for now, and I think maybe I, kept beating the horse, but like I said, I want to be thorough in this one specific thing and try to, look at it from several different angles and cover the various aspects of it that can also be problems. So I hope that's what I was able to do. I hope you got that out of it, and not just a 40-minute rant. And let me know what you think. Comments on the blog are great. Emails are good too, but I would love comments and let other people be able to see it. If you find this interesting and would like to explore it for yourself, I offer recorded consultations. They're only $19. Very simple. You record an example of what you do, what you're dealing with. I'll watch it, and I'll respond basically just like this with a video specifically addressing what I observe in your vocalization. Okay? So just let me know if that's something you're interested in. I'd love to do it for you. Okay? Talk to you soon, and keep coming back. Okay. Bye.